Alright YouTube, so we were back of course to talk about some Final Fantasy VII Remake, and we're back with what is probably like the last segment of this where we talk about whether or not they're going to change a character when it comes to Remake Part 2. Mostly we've been talking about the party members we do not have yet. We already talked about Cid, Vincent, and Cait Sith. We could probably do something like Red 13 at some point, maybe. That could be another video we do, because technically he has not joined our party yet. We haven't got a lot of character story for him yet, so we could maybe discuss him at some point as well. But today we're here to discuss Yuffie Kisaragi, I believe is how you say her last name. Now she is an interesting one because she's the other optional character when it came to the original FF7. Her and Vincent, of course. And she's a part of the 4 that we have not seen yet when it comes to Remake. Though I guess technically we did get a quick brief look at Cait Sith when it came to Part 1. But I'll tell you right out the gate, when it comes to Yuffie, out of the 4 we've talked about so far, I do think she's the most likely to change, simply because even though she's an optional character just like Vincent in the original game, Vincent was pretty important to the overall story, right? He had connections to Shinra and the Turks. He was in love with Lucretia, who was Sephiroth's birth mother, and he also knew Professor Gas, which is Aerith's birth father, right? Like, he had connections to all these important characters throughout the story. Yuffie, on the other hand, doesn't really add a lot to the overall story. Not only is she a optional character, which means she is missable, her, town location of Wutai is also missable. It's a location you never have to go to in FF7. You can completely omit Wutai from your playthrough, and it wouldn't really change anything at all. Now, there is some side story to be had there with the Turks that are also in Wutai, and of course the second run-in with Don Corneo. But again, that's stuff you don't have to do. Now, I never skip that on a playthrough. I always go to Wutai. I think it's a fantastic location. Also, I don't know how anybody would ever miss Wutai on a playthrough, because, don't get me wrong, FF7 for its time was a massive game. The world was fantastic to explore, but there's really not a whole lot to it. It'd be hard to miss an entire continent. Also, another side note, I cannot wait to get to Wutai within Remake Part 2 or 3 or whatever it might be, and have that second run-in with Don Corneo, because I think he is a fantastic character in Part 1. I'm really interested in how they're going to handle him when it comes to the Wutai segment. Now, I think it goes without saying, similar to Vincent, that I do not believe Yuffie's going to be an optional character. It would be cool if they would keep that in the game, but then again, you have to, make a plethora of different cutscenes where you do or don't have Yuffie, Vincent, both of them, none of them. It'd be way too much effort, but it would be cool if we could do the optional thing. Something I haven't discussed in the past before, though, is that it is entirely possible for them to be optional, because when it comes to the cutscenes where, characters are kind of talking together, that's in-engine, it looks the same as gameplay, right? It's really the cinematics are super high-quality cutscenes that would be kind of hard to juggle whether or not you do or don't have characters. So it's not entirely off the table, right? Character dialogue is the same as gameplay, so it's not like they couldn't make these characters optional. I don't think it's going to happen. I think most of the community is in agreement that they're going to be mandatory characters, but I still think it'd be cool if they could find a way to make Vincent and Yuffie optional if you want them to be. But as somebody who does believe that Yuffie will no longer be an optional character, I think that's where one of the changes will happen. Now, I don't know how we're going to run into her. They might change it entirely, but if we base it off the original game, we can first run into her in the forest right before Junon. So maybe that location, the overworld or the world map, whatever we're going to be doing with Part 2 and beyond, maybe there's a forced encounter somewhere around there. And given that she'll no longer be an optional character, we probably won't have, the question thing afterwards in the field where you got to, answer things specifically right for her to join you. That's probably not going to be a thing, because if you got them wrong, then she wouldn't join you. Something else that's very interesting in regards to Final Fantasy VII versus Final Fantasy VII Remake is that with the original game, there's the Shinra war with Wutai, right? But with the original game, it's already over. It's already happened. It's in the past. I don't remember how long ago it's in the past, but it's already happened and over. When it comes to Remake, the war with Wutai is still very much going on. Chapter 16, when we're going into the Shinra building, Tifa mentions the security being tight. Cloud mentions it possibly being for Avalanche or Wutai. Barrett mentions there's a ceasefire on the war, and Cloud says that only put the war on pause. So direct confirmation that the war is still happening in the Remake universe. And if we want to toss in another side note here really quickly, the fact that the Wutai war is still happening within Remake, maybe that's another confirmation of alternate timelines and things like that, because it's supposed to be already done some years before FF7 even starts, but for some reason with Remake, it's still going on. But to bring all this back to the character of Yuffie, her hometown is Wutai, the Wutai War is still happening, and that could be a big part of her character, right? Her story, or maybe even how we meet her. Maybe we don't even meet her until we get to Wutai. I don't think they're going to save it that long, because we may not reach Wutai in Part 2, but maybe. And actually, now that I'm saying it, I do think the Wutai War stuff is going to be a big part of her story, obviously, and Cloud does claim to be a member of Soldier, which is obviously a part of Shinra, so maybe that's how she meets us, and maybe she does steal our material again like the original game, because maybe she thinks we're all working for Shinra or something like that. But when it comes to what her overall story would be in Remake, it's kind of hard to speculate, simply because based on the original game, a lot of it was, for one, entirely optional, but also it didn't have a whole lot of ties to the overall story for FF7. The original concept for Yuffie when it came to FF7 was for her to be like a bounty hunter that's like hunting our group or hunting Cloud or something like that. I don't remember off the top of my head, but maybe that's something they could incorporate into the remake story. Maybe she's a bounty hunter instead of just a materia thief. There's a lot of ways this could go, man, especially with the Wutai War still happening. I think that's going to change her character overall and make her story and her character more cohesive with the overall FF7 story. It's in terms of remake. But I definitely want to pass it up to you guys. So when it comes to Yuffie, Kisaragi, and Final Fantasy VII Remake, how do you think they're going to handle her? Again, do you think she's going to be optional, not optional? And how do you think they're going to handle her, like us meeting her joining the party and things like that? And how do you think they're going to handle her character and story with the Wutai War still happening? Either way, leave your thoughts in the comment section below. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you guys are new with more Final Fantasy VII Remake content. Turn on my notifications. Follow me on Twitter at dashingdavidyt. And my Discord. Links to my social networks are in the description. And in the outro. Later, guys.
Yuffie Kisaragi! Feast your eyes on... Whoa!
Used to care what people thought, but now I care more. And nobody out here's got it figured out. So therefore, I've lost all hope of a happy ending, depending on whether or not it's worth it. So insecure, no one's perfect. We spend it with no shame. We blow that like Coltrane. We in here like Rogaine or leave it like Cobain.